All right, so let's look at Nephron Anatomy. All right, nephrons again are the structural and functional unit of the kidney. This is where the filtration, this is where everything happens. They are super, super tiny. Tiny. Okay, there are 1,000,000 nephrons in one kidney. All right, so they're tiny, tiny, tiny things. Okay, so the nephron begins in a place that has blood vessels, capillaries, that causes the filtration, where the blood comes in and is filtered. And then it connects to a bunch of tubules that will go around and then eventually dump into that renal papilla. Okay, so I'm going to start with this top part of my Okay, so this is like, it looks like a little claw here. This is not flat, it's a sphere, okay? And this area, which has a space in it, surrounds a knot of capillaries. So it surrounds a knot of capillaries. So the capillaries are in here. Okay, so this is just a bunch of capillaries inside of here. So this thing here, this knot of capillaries, is called the glomerulus. All right, so this is a capillary bed. Okay, but it's a weird looking capillary bed. It isn't like the ones we normally see. Remember, these are going to be made up of fenestrated capillaries, and it's like a big knot. They're all tangled up. It's like a big tangle of capillaries there. This tangle of capillaries, called the glomerulus, is surrounded by this capsule thing. So this capsule is called Bowman's capsule. Okay, this is where things are filtered into. Okay, filter into the capsule. Okay, the capsule is connected to another sort of knot of tubules called the proximal convoluted tubule. So this is the proximal convoluted tubule, or the PCT. Okay, so that's why I drew it kind of wrinkly like that, because it's not a straight tube. The tube, the proximal convoluted tubule, is a long thing that kind of intertwines around itself and then eventually curves down into the medulla. Okay, this area, I'll show that in just a second. But the tube makes a turn to go down into the medulla, and this starts what we call the Loop of Henle. So this arm here is the descending Loop of Henle, and it comes down and makes a hairpin turn and comes back up. And this part that comes back up is the ascending Loop of Henle. Okay, it comes over here, turns again, and becomes the distal convoluted tubule, or DCT. DCT. Okay, that tubule comes around and will enter another tubule that will go back down into the medulla, and this is the one that goes down to the renal papilla. This is the collecting duct. Okay. The collecting duct can have more than one nephron attached to it. So there's a nephron here, here's the going to a nephron there, and all the way down. Okay, remember there's a million nephrons. Okay, so this is the general anatomy of the nephron itself. Over here, where this capillary bed is, you can see there's two vessels that are going into and out of. This one here is called the afferent arteriole. Okay, so that's where the blood enters the glomerulus. This one here is called the efferent arteriole. Okay, so the efferent arteriole takes the blood out of the glomerulus after it's been filtered. The afferent arteriole takes it into the glomerulus to be filtered. Okay, I put a line here across. Then anything up above here is the cortex, and what's down here is the medulla. Okay, so you can see here the glomerulus and Bowman's capsule, those are always going to be in the cortex. The proximal convoluted tubule is always going to be in the cortex. The loops of Henle, the descending and the ascending loop, the descending goes down into the medulla, the ascending goes back up till it gets to the distal convoluted tubule, which will be in the cortex again. Okay. All right, so that is the anatomy of the nephron itself. What we need to look at now is the blood supply. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and go through that. Hopefully it won't get confused on this picture. Okay, so we have a blood vessel going in. Okay, and that blood vessel going in ultimately comes from the renal artery. So the renal artery will go into the kidney. It separates into segmental arteries, and then those go into what are called interlobar arteries, which go through the columns of the kidney, and then those go into arcuate vessels, or arteries and veins, and then those go into radiate arteries and veins, and then the radiate arteries and veins have the afferent arterioles attached to them. Okay, those are what enter the glomerulus. The efferent arteriole exits the glomerulus that's where the filtered blood leaves that area after it's been filtered. So the efferent arteriole then becomes a set of capillaries that kind of intertwine around the tubules. Okay, so they go generally in this direction, and this, what I'm drawing here, is like a straight line of a capillary, but it's not. It's like a bunch of capillaries just kind of wrapped around the nephron, okay? And then it comes out, it goes around through the cortex, down into the medulla, around, around the loops of Henle, and then back up, back into the cortex, and then it will eventually exit, and will eventually exit out the renal vein, okay? So these capillaries up in this area, these are called peritubular capillaries. So these up here are called peritubular capillaries, these here. This is the direction that we're going, is this direction here. So these are all peritubular capillaries that wrap around the nephron. Now there's two types of nephrons. There's, let's go down here. So two types of nephrons. Cortical nephrons and juxtamedullary, I think they're called, nephrons. The differences is the cortical nephrons, their loop it goes into the medulla, but not far into the medulla. The juxtamedullary nephrons have really long loops of Henle that go deep down into the medulla there. In those juxtamedullary nephrons with the long loops of Henle, the peritubular capillaries have a special name, and they're called the vasa recta. So the vasa recta capillaries are the capillaries that wrap around those long loops of Henle in the juxtamedullary nephrons. Okay, but overall, like in the cortical nephron, all of those capillaries are just called peritubular capillaries. Okay, that is the anatomy of the nephron. So the nephron with its blood supply. Okay, so let's look at what the nephron actually does.